As for an introduction, I'll be your panel moderator today, and I'm a director with Cepheid Diagnostics, which makes mostly infectious disease diagnostics, molecular infectious disease diagnostics. And with that, I'll also go to each one of our panelists so that they can introduce themselves and talk a bit about their organization. And then we have an exciting list of questions that we get into. Of course, the session partner for this panel is Unipath Specialty Laboratories, so thank you for their support. And with that, I'll go to Dr. Ramprasad first, who is the CEO of MEDGENOME India. So Dr. Ram, if you want to quickly introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Kaartik. I'm Ramprasad. I'm the Chief Executive Officer from MEDGENOME Labs. Basically, I'm trained human geneticist, and for the last 8 years, I've been with MEDGENOME. I've started off as Chief Operating Officer, and last 2.5 years, I've been at the helm of business affairs since the time COVID has started. And it's a pleasure to be on this platform with all the eminent speakers here. Thanks, Kaartik.
Thank you, Dr. Ram. We'll go to Rishi Suri, who heads the strategy and business planning at Tata Medical and Diagnostics.
Thanks, Kaartik. My name is Rishi Suri. I currently head strategy and business planning for Tata Medical and Diagnostics. I've played various roles in the healthcare industry, very passionate about the industry, have spent time working for hospitals, have spent time across the different value systems as an advisor heading healthcare consulting for Deloitte India. Currently, I work with Tata MD, which is a new venture started by the Tata Group, and we focus on medical products, medical technology, and at the moment we've launched several molecular diagnostic tests for COVID, and over the next few months and quarters, you'll see us coming out with several products in other segments of the IVD space, namely immuno, clinical chemistry, hematology, and so on and so forth. Look forward to the interaction today.
Thanks. We'll go to Dr. NEERAJ Arora, who is the Director of Molecular Biology at Unipath Specialty Laboratories.
Thank you, Kaartik, and thank you all, and morning to all. I am Dr. NEERAJ, and I work as a Laboratory Director, Molecular Biology at Unipath Specialty Laboratory, Ahmedabad. I'm based at Ahmedabad, and I am a pathologist by training, and I have had various roles as both as a hematopathologist and molecular pathologist earlier at Tata Medical Center. I have joined Unipath lab around 1 year back, and we are a company which works in the diagnostic space since last 10 years. And now we have around 40 laboratories present in around 12 states. That's we are with. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. NEERAJ. We'll go to Dr. Reddi, who's tuning in from Manipal hospitals in Bangalore, and he's an interventional radiologist. So over to you, Dr. Reddi.
Thank you, Mr. Kaartik, and good morning to everyone. And it's a pleasure to be part of the panel with all eminent people. My name is Dr. Reddi Prasad. I'm a consultant interventional radiologist, and I head the Department of Interventional Radiology at Manipal Hospital's Old Airport Road, Bangalore.
Lastly, we'll go to Dr. Satheesh Kumar, who is the Head of Business Development at Agappe Diagnostics.
Thank you, Mr. Kaartik and the Unipath team for giving the opportunity for us to have this panel session. I am Satheesh Kumar. I am basically a pharmacist and a regulatory officer. I was FDA head in Kerala earlier. I retired from government service and joined Agappe last 9 years with Agappe. I am looking after the head in the business development.
So something I really like to ask people and leaders from this industry is, what have been those learnings, right, from the pandemic in terms of logistical challenges or hiring people or scaling up production? So all of you would have unique insights, but maybe to kick things off, I'll go to Dr. Satheesh first, who's from Agappe Diagnostics. So Dr. Satheesh, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Kaartik. The post-pandemic and pandemic lessons have taught us a lot of lessons, especially the importance of the tools of diagnosis. where indigenous production only can save the health of the people in our country during the pandemic times. During pandemic time, it was noticed that all the international flights and even cargo vessels were suspended for a long time. And there are restrictions, and the entire world was restricted, and they would have literally incapacitated even every supplier in all countries. Whole supply chain across the globe was in total doldrums, I remember. We had tough time to get raw materials exported from different countries normally during the period. Same time, we have seen that the biggest leap in molecular diagnostics, as we call MDX, that is the biggest leap in the pre and the post-pandemic period, and as well as point of care solutions also. These two sectors have emerged as the most prospective branches of the diagnosis for the last 2 years. In comparison with the pre and post-pandemic era, the molecular diagnostics has grown from 2% to 40%, and the growing is continuous rather. So we know the emergent situations for supplying ventilators, oxygen concentrators to different parts of the country was so difficult during that period. But somehow our industry has production has been increased by industry, and we could supply the enough capacity of these reagents and equipments in time. Our industries have the capacity to manifold the production definitely, but raw materials dependence of our companies to overseas is our biggest weakness. Even if it is a reagent component or ICUs of equipment, electronic components, now indigenous source is not that much we have. So what happens? Government policy will change in such a way that they should encourage basic R&D for the availability of the entire components for master mix, or as well as the components of any equipment or reagent in India. The government institutions like 𝐒𝐏𝐄𝐊 are also supporting this initiative, but we find the quality of the indigenous raw materials is a question. So our main challenges for indigenous production scaling up are, one is lack of encouragement from the government to policy so that promote basic research in India and make these raw material available for a good price in India. Then government should modify the patient care protocols favoring molecular analysis solutions so that doctors and other clinicians can use this technology. As of now, only HIV, then TB, COVID panels are normally on protocols are favoring the diagnostics tools on MDX. If there is a more requirement, the industry will grow.
Satheesh, I can empathize with a couple of the things you said, actually, right? Because I think bringing, you talked about manufacturing and it being closer, your supply chains being closer, right? Because once things hit, everybody's rushing for the same resources, and everybody's found out that eventually their supply chain involves something in China or someplace else, right? And so
Yes.
Full localization, I know the government's been talking about it, but is easier said than done, right? And so maybe there are incentives to be put there. Maybe there's an overall sort of thought process there. I do want to go to Dr. NEERAJ, right? Because he will bring a somewhat unique perspective, because he's managing the lab, right? The molecular diagnostics lab. And so they've been at the forefront of this. They're getting pummeled with samples. I'm sure it is happening now. So, thank you for taking out time from your busy day. But I'd love to hear your experience, Dr. NEERAJ.
Yeah, thank you, Kaartik. I think, as pointed out by Dr. Satheesh, I think what I realize is the main challenge was handling the volumes, from the laboratory perspective. And
Right.
see, I came from a background of a hematopathologist or a molecular pathologist from a cancer center, Tata Medical Center, where we were handling some close to around 4,000 samples a year, to now coming to around 10,000 samples a day. So you see the amount of volume and the challenges that you faced, and believe me or not, each step, it was a stepwise phase. You could see the challenges coming at maybe handling samples around 1,000 samples. So there was unique challenges there, because it allowed you to improve your in-house working. So very soon you reached to something around 3,000, 4,000 samples. And again, there were unique set of challenges being able to provide quality services, with that workload. And then touching down to 10,000, you could see the whatever systems you would place, you could see the end of that system, provided you with the vision to see that this is the end. I cannot go out with beyond this limit with the system that I have. Maybe with the logistic team that you put, maybe the way you are accessioning your sample, maybe the way you are processing those samples, or maybe the equipments that you have, the way the equipments are performing, you could see the end of each and everything. And that is a vision that I think is very, very important to improve each and every the process that you have. So having a vision to be able to see the end and where the challenges lie. So this pandemic, both it gave an challenges, I mean, in this way of challenges, as well as providing opportunities how to work and be able to overcome that and learn from that experiences. So this, like you are now more open to and automation, giving each and every step you wanted to automate, not only to fasten your processes but to lessen your errors as well. This is down at each and every step. Maybe at accessioning step, your data transfer to your assays, and maybe reporting as well, and going to the people as well. I mean, in a way, providing reports on WhatsApp or on different ways of communicating. So each and every step, it provided unique opportunities to be able to work at that level. So I think in this pandemic was a very unique process where it has allowed us to look at and even open us to different technologies, more digitalization, more automation, and improve ourselves in many ways, and learning from those experiences, that we continue to do so even now. And this is maybe 1 year down the line, handling 2,000 samples would be very, very difficult. But now, since you have seen 10,000 samples, now 2,000 samples is like a cakewalk. It is just going through like that. So that is what this thing has done. And now you are more, when I am more looking for those innovative steps, I'm keen, and I want to collaborate and look to people who can indigenize or can improve the services. Earlier you would close your, this is the way, this is going to happen, and nobody can provide better services beyond this. But now you are looking beyond that, looking how to improve those, and that's what this has taught us.
No, thanks. I think you made a good point, right? The 10,000 samples a day, because yes, COVID is one. We'd like to think that COVID ends or subsides at one point in time, but there are enough other disease burdens in India, right, that could be utilizing that testing capacity that you've built, right? Infectious diseases. So, and one thing I think that I've read, talking to some of our customers as well, is that in a country like India, which is so diverse, right, there is also a need to be providing testing closer to the patient, right? So when you say closer to the patient, it could be at home, like we've seen with some of the antigen tests, right? And then a little sort of further away could be, that clinic or that GP clinic or that, a large sort of pharmacy that does some tests, at least first line tests to begin with. We see this in the US, right? Where in CVS, Walgreens, you have all those sort of, flu tests and things like that. And so I'll go to Rishi because, of course, when you have one of the largest Indian conglomerates entering the space, they must be seeing something that, that makes them want to enter the space. So, Rishi, I'd love to get your thoughts on sort of how maybe the pandemic, or even, irrespective of the pandemic, how do you see sort of this need for at-home testing, self-testing, especially given COVID and maybe even some other ailments, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, I think this is a brilliant point that you brought up. It's not just about home testing, it's about bringing test closer to patients, right? So if we have specialized tests that right now happen only in national reference labs, the idea is how is it that we can get it down to, let's say, the regional labs? Whatever right now gets aggregated at the regional level, how do we get it down to the satellite lab? And whatever happens in a satellite lab, can it eventually go to a doctor's chamber and then eventually to the home, right? So it's a continuous evolution of bringing diagnostics closer to patients. So a shift from right to left, that's basically how we're looking at it. And while in this session, I all the views that I express are personal, and I don't in some way represent my organization, but that's exactly the vision of Tata MD as well, bringing healthcare closer to patients. Specifically for home tests, let me answer it in the context of COVID, and then also take the argument at a broader level. So see, what we have realized is that as COVID is becoming more and more endemic, and that is what, and Omicron, I would say, has taken that journey, definitely more towards being endemic, where we will see a lot of people getting infected. What is most important is that we do not have too much reliance on labs, even though labs would continue to do, let's say, an RT-PCR test, which would continue to be gold standard, but over time, time would become more important, and that's really the direction that US also seems to be taking, where they are prioritizing home tests. Even CDC and FDA are talking about home tests more than RT-PCR. Not to take away anything from the fact that RT-PCR would continue to be gold standard, but essentially what happens is that it'll take me some time to develop symptoms. It'll take me some time to actually feel this might be COVID. Then I would ask for a test, and especially in the middle of a wave, we've seen that if we reach out to labs, there'll typically be a 1 or 2 day delay before a phlebotomist can come and visit us at our home. Then if you're lucky, you'll get a report in 24 hours. Sometimes it can take longer, right? So in that time, the person still doesn't know for sure whether he or she has COVID, and from a public health point of view is a threat to the community, right? So therefore, even though self-tests would probably always have lower sensitivity, but they do play a very, very important role, especially as the disease is becoming more and more endemic. So that's one viewpoint, and I'm sure Dr. NEERAJ may not like me for saying that, and we can probably have a discussion. But that was something that came to my mind. Also, so that's one aspect of it. And secondly, what we've seen over time, the self tests. The gap in sensitivity between an RT-PCR and the self-antigen tests, or even the professional antigen tests, has also been narrowing, right? So let's say last year, antigen tests would be great if they had 50% sensitivity, so it was a hit or a miss. No one really trusted rats at all. But over time, we are seeing that sensitivity also going up. So now it's a balance between speed on one hand and sensitivity on the other. Of course, the gold standard would be the lab-based tests, but if you look at it in balance, they will definitely have a very, very important role to play, specifically for a COVID-like situation. Now, even if we extend the argument beyond COVID, what we spoke about, taking diagnostics closer to patient. If we look at, for instance, what a glucometer did with respect to diabetes management. If we were still relying on people having to send their blood samples to labs just to know their blood sugar level, the fight towards diabetes management would not have been at the stage at which it is right now, right? So clearly, if we have tests that can be trusted, that are reliable, and can be delivered at home, especially either for chronic diseases or for infectious diseases which have reached a pandemic stage, then I think there's a very good case to be made for home tests.
Thanks, Rishi. I think you made some really valid point. They certainly find a place in a country as large as India, right? I do want to shift focus now, right? Because I think one thing that's happened, and it was happening even before the pandemic, is just the vast amounts of data that companies, academics, research institutes now have, right? And over the last 2 years, since a lot of our interactions have been digitized, right, you have that data more readily available, right? And so perhaps I'd like to call in, Dr. Ramprasad, because this is right up his sort of alley, right? And so I have two questions. Right? One is, how do you see the usage of, all these vast troves of data, and specifically with the usage of sort of artificial intelligence and machine learning to your realm of work, and then more specifically again to your industry is, with genomics. I think with what we've done with RT-PCR is now every grandmother and kid on the street knows what a molecular test is, right? But is that something that's happening in genomics as well, where now you're seeing patients being, more reliant, or clinicians being more reliant on this technology, especially for preventative health checkups, cancer screening, things like that. So I'd love to get your thoughts on the two points, Dr. Ramprasad.
Yeah. Thanks, Kaartik. I think that's a very important question, and there are certain very niche areas where deep learning using available data, and I wanted to emphasize here, when I say data, it's a high quality of data. So the quantity of data is important, but the quality of data is extremely important. And if you have seen the last 2 years of COVID pandemic, the amount of data that has been generated, both in terms of epidemiological as well as certain clinical parameters that have come up, especially in demographies like India, has been vast. But there have been certain controversies or certain remarks and some critical thoughts about the quality of data that has been collected so far. So it's extremely important, whichever field we are talking about, whether it's genomics or digital pathology or radiology, AI, the quality of data to train the deep learning algorithms is extremely important. That's the first point. Second is, if you are looking at the impact, whether simple machine learning algorithms that are doing, whether in form of a simple chatbot, you have seen classic examples, if not in India, at least in Europe and US, there have been nice chatbots with machine learning algorithms trained on vast amounts of data, where the chatbot can tell you what disease you have with high sensitivity and good specificity to some extent. And it reduces the waiting time of the patients in systems like NHS, and especially in COVID times when system is completely, up to the brim. And there are certain situations in radiology. You have seen companies like 𝐒𝐄𝐄𝐄 working with many of the physicians and hospitals on the COVID diagnosis using AI algorithms on radiology images. So there are niche areas where, including if you talk about companies like or technologies like NEERAJ AI on the breast cancer imaging using artificial algorithms and machine learning tools. Not very complicated ones, but these are very good tools which decrease the waiting time, increase the sensitivity, increase the speed at which they are diagnosed, and definitely deep learning and machine learning tools are making positive impact, at least in certain niche areas. Now, coming into my field or niche area, which we've been working for the last 7 to 8 years, I'll give you a classic case study or use case, how some of the at least deep learning, machine learning tools help. When we sequence an individual, like how you sequence a COVID genome, COVID genome is a very tiny genome, whereas the human genome is almost about 3 billion bases. A rare disease case, when you do an exome sequencing, or an oncology tumor, when you sequence a tumor to identify mutations for either diagnostic or therapeutic purposes, you get several thousands of variants, anywhere between 15 to 25,000 variants you get in every individual case. Now, if you have to scale up testing these for millions of patients across the country, across the world, manual identification of the disease variant from these thousands of variants is impossible. Number one, it's not a scalable option. Number two, you need to have large amount of trained workforce. Today, it is not possible, not only in India, even in US, it's extremely impossible to get hundreds of people who are trained in genomic interpretation from the data. So 4 years we've been working with a machine learning tool, a very simple machine learning tool. Since we have a couple of million cases of exome data, we have trained this data on the algorithm. And today, roughly about 40 to 50% of our cases are directly picked up by machine learning tool based on the rules which have been already. And these rules are basically universal. It's not specific for our company, but these rules are universal across. And the specificity of this ML tool is extremely high. It's almost as much as 90 to 95%, even though sensitivity is pretty low. But at least many of these disease-causing mutations in rare diseases or oncology, when you sequence tumor, when you sequence breast cancer samples, are picked up without much manual intervention, and machine learning algorithms play a very good role.
And since we are talking about sort of interventions and innovations therein, I do want to go to Dr. Reddi Prasad, right? And I think that's another field of sort of interventional radiology that's seen a lot of advances. So Dr. Reddi Prasad, we were talking about sort of cancer and oncology care with Dr. Ram, and I know the sort of place of interventional radiology there is very important. So I'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
Sure, Mr. Kaartik. Thank you. A couple of points following on what our colleagues on the panel have been discussing about the COVID. Now, thankfully, with Omicron, symptoms seem to be much milder, although lot of people are infected. Now, sorry about the background noise. Manipal Hospital is very close to the airport, the old airport. So the first wave, it was a shock throughout the world to everyone, and we are part of it. The healthcare industry being part of it, it was a shock. How do you really take things on? How do you deal with it? And Manipal Hospitals as an organization has been extremely supportive to the staff, and we therefore have provided very high standard of healthcare to everyone. And then what happened was we were prepared for the second wave, which we were not expecting, or whatever happened, we were better prepared given the first wave. And now with the third wave, hopefully things will be milder and quickly people will develop resistance. During these couple of years, what we have really learned is how do we manage with the available resources. And suddenly the demand has picked up, it has surged, and how do we provide the best possible care to the patients? How do we come together as teams? Although these principles were already existent, but this was like a war zone, coming to the hospital every day, which is a epicenter. You are at high risk, and you are coming to the centers which are high risk places where you might get infected. And if you get infected, how do we really provide services? That was one thing. Now, coming on specifically to your question about interventional radiology, very briefly about myself. Before coming to Manipal Hospitals, I trained and worked in the UK for 14 years. That is where I specialized to become an interventional radiologist. What is interventional radiology for the education of the wider community? It is a super specialty within radiology. And whilst radiologists play a central role in the diagnosis of any disease, we as interventional radiologists perform therapeutic procedures utilizing ultrasound, X-rays, CT scan, MRI, and all these things. In a simple line, what I would say is interventional radiologists are very similar to cardiologists. What cardiologists do to the heart, angioplasty, stenting, to improve the blood flow to the heart, we take care of rest of the body. So in simple terms, we say we are superb body plumbers. What it means is we show a tube anywhere anything is blocked, we will open it up. That is what the interventional radiologists do. And the beauty is the advances are such that we do the whole procedure through a 2 to 3 millimeter hole. It could be either liver ducts, the bile ducts that are blocked. It could be the intestines that are blocked. It could be the blood vessels that are blocked. So interventional radiologists might perform neuro also, which means the brain interventions, and rest of I'm a body interventional radiologist. I don't do cardiac or neuro, but rest of the body, liver, kidney, gastrointestinal tract, urology, cancer care, we play a huge significant role. And it is very important for the wider community to be aware what interventional radiology is. Thankfully, a lot of the hospital doctors are completely aware and knowledgeable about what we can deliver to improve the patient care by very minimally invasive approach. What could be done through a big incision can be done these days through pinhole. So hence the word pinhole surgery. We might not be surgeons by title, but I have done surgical training in the UK, and then radiology, and then interventional radiology. So we are super specialists in a way that we form a very, very integral part and of the core teams managing the patients. We play a significant role in cancer care. We have Manipal Comprehensive Cancer Center, which is providing the best possible care, world-class care. So I'm an integral part. My team is an integral part of the cancer care, and we do procedures as adjuncts or primarily in the cancer care. We are an integral part of nephro care. We take care of the dialysis patients. We provide lines. Previously, what the surgeons used to cut open and do procedures for providing dialysis. These days, through 3-4 millimeter holes, everything is performed. And then we maintain, for example, a fistula. We do major procedures both under general anesthesia and sedation, and we thereby provide high quality healthcare services through very, very minimally invasive means. So in simple terms, what used to be a major surgery, cut open, large incision, 10 to 15 centimeter, then became laparoscopic, keyhole surgery. Then there is robotic surgery, which is one of the most recent advances. Similarly, interventional radiology, the hole is even smaller, 2 to 3 millimeter, and it is pinhole surgery. So we are able to perform and provide this kind of high-end healthcare due to advances in medical technology. The catheters that were being used previously, the small tubes that can enter the body, were 4 French, for example. That's a couple of 1.5 millimeter. Now the smallest catheters we are able to use to get into the arteries, even to the peripheral most part of the body, are less than a millimeter. And the particles that we use, for example, in embolization procedure, have become much smaller and smaller, and thereby we can get to any end artery in the body. The coils that we use for embolization are much smaller and smaller. That is one thing with therapeutic. Second thing, with regard to diagnostics, the advances within the CT scanners that are available, the slices now obviously 64, 128, widely available and widely used. There is integration of the interventional lab systems, be it Siemens, GE, Philips. There is an integration of both the interventional labs with the CT scan. That's called hybrid, And then we are also having interventional labs within the theater. That is called a hybrid theater. So there is significant advances. And the next thing is trauma. When the patient has a major accident, they come to the hospital. Next to the accident emergency, all these high-end hybrid labs are available. This is happening throughout the world, both Western world and in India. So I think I would like to summarize, we play a very significant role and a central role by minimally invasive means. That's the beauty. And the patient cannot even look at their scar. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Reddy Prasad. It's been an education for me, I think, hearing you talk about your field. And I think, if I'm to think back to what some of our earlier panelists said, I think, the core theme is innovation, right? Whether it's in diagnostics testing, you talk about an interventional radiology, and hopefully all of that innovation leads to better quality of care for the patient. Right? I think all of us working in healthcare, we know, or predominantly we all got into this field to be able to at least improve lives and quality of care for the patient. Right? So maybe the next question I can kind of think of is, pandemic has done a couple of things. Right? One is the sheer number of testing, the sheer number of sort of patients that are going through the system, both for COVID and then also for the regular care, right? Whether it's cancer and all of the other sort of diseases. Right? The second thing that's happened is a lot of it has become digitized or remote, right? Where sometimes, the patient in terms of COVID is not even seeing the doctor. The collection agent came and took the sample. He did a teleconsultation with his GP or whomever, started taking drugs, and hopefully he or she improved, right? So it's great that we're able to cater to these large number of sort of patients, especially in a country like India. But how are, if there are specific examples or risks in terms of what that means for quality of care, right? So maybe I'll go to Dr. Arora first, and then I'd love to hear from Dr. Ramprasad as well. Just, how is for you, Dr. NEERAJ, specifically you as a lab, perhaps how are you looking at ensuring that quality of care for the patient is still sort of, central to what you do?
I think that has always been the theme of anything that we do in the laboratory as such. This kind of the volumes that I was talking of, has allowed us to put definite specific quality checks in place. Be it, as I told you, at the accessioning, you have now two level checks. Two people checking out. As it comes to the laboratory, again there is a another level of check being happening to be able to cross check that whether those samples are reaching. I mean, what I want to say is there is a system which has been developed, which has been refined with that volumes, and these systems are being integrated to different other assays that we talk of in terms of genomics. And when I talk of genomics, it does mean, because once your DNA is extracted, you never come to know what the sample is coming from. So there are a lot of challenges which come on to once the sample passes through the lab. So this has reinforced the QC steps that we used to talk of earlier in terms of labeling, in terms of automation, in terms of preventing errors in typing errors, typo errors, so that we're giving automation in terms of improving that kind of services. So this whole system of genomic reporting has improved as a from sort of a super specialized to now it is coming into the routine things that we are doing. And as it comes into the routine, there are definitely more steps being integrated, and much of these steps are being reinforced from the government as well. Like COVID testing, you have your 𝐒𝐏𝐄𝐄𝐓 testing being reinforced from the government itself. So that we're already practicing for other assays, but yes, government is taking initiatives in that direction. So I would say, I think definitely there has been a lot of improvements in terms of providing quality care. And if you make errors, believe me, if you make errors, it doesn't take long to pay you back. You cannot escape that. So that again reinforces the steps that you need to take to improve whatever report is going out from your lab. And when this is all across, the quality of the tests that you are doing, the kits that you are using, at all across levels.
No, thanks. Dr. Ramprasad, if just to get your perspective from some of the other work you do, maybe beyond COVID, right? How are you looking at, with all this new innovation, what are some of the backstops that ensure that, quality of care? I think you're on mute.
So this is a very interesting question, for a simple reason that the genomic testing, or currently whatever scaled up molecular testing is coming up, except those which are in point of care, or which are like, for example, Cepheid Diagnostics, except those testing, rest are all is a different ball game. Okay, so routine pathology or even specialized pathology is a well-oiled machine. Okay, most of the time, globally, there are systems, there are automations, there are many QC checkpoints that are currently available. So that's a different ball game. Even though the QC errors, QC parameters do apply for those things, but in genetic testing, when we started, the first thing which at least I used to tell with all my team members about 7 to 8 years back, how genetic testing is completely different to routine pathology is, as Dr. NEERAJ said, you make a mistake in DNA-based testing, it will haunt you. In routine pathology, there are different ways you can justify an error. There are different ways you can say, for example, I do a blood glucose testing today, I get about 120 milligrams per deciliter, and I think it's not correct. And there is another lab tomorrow morning, I give it, and they give you 200 milligrams per deciliter. And I can say that, yes, today my sample, my blood glucose is 200 milligrams, okay? But DNA-based testing is not like that. You do it today, you do it 20 years down the lane for a germline, you have to detect that variant in the sample. There is no way you can run against it. So if you make an error, that mistake will come back after 6 years, 7 years, or even 8 years back to you. So it is always important to establish robust, comprehensive quality protocols in the laboratory, starting from pre-analytics, because worldwide, in any laboratory testing, 90% of the errors happen pre-analytical, not inside the lab. How you collect the sample, how you label the sample, how you ship the sample in the temperature, whether it's a COVID testing or whether it's a sequencing sample or the flow cytometry sample, these make a lot of differences. So quality, comprehensive quality parameters, QC, internal assessments and external assessments are extremely important. Second point, especially for India, when we started in 7 years back, we were looking, there was no player in India who was doing sequencing-based testing. So we wanted to assess as to what we are doing is accurate, or their errors starting from the sample collection till interpretation. Because unlike routine or specialized pathology, there are a lot of moving parts in genetic testing because things are not streamlined, not automated yet. So how do we assess ourselves as a part of a good quality practice, laboratory practice? So external quality assessment programs are extremely important, and we were keen to get into NABL. However, one important aspect about NABL, while it's a fantastic way and a lot of improvements have been done in the last several years, is it lacks external quality assessment schemes, especially the proficiency testing is lacking on NABL. So how do I know what test I do is giving accurate results? So there needs to be EQUAS, there needs to be proficiency testing, proficiency test to all my individuals, all my team members, geneticists, and also blinded assessments as to we are up to the international standards. So that's when we decided we will go ahead with the CAP accreditation. CAP has a very proficient external quality assessment schemes, and every quarter, every month, you run blinded samples from CAP, and you have to match. I know many labs are there in India who run CAP for routine and specialized pathology. It's exactly the same way how we do it, and it needs to match exactly, and you have to have 100% PT pass percentage. If you don't have enough pass percentage and NCs are regularly coming up, CAP might give you a notice and remove you from the CAP listed laboratory. So this is a fantastic metric for us and barometer to assess what quality parameters that we are following, whether it's pre-analytical or laboratory, are up to the mark and we are getting appropriate results. And this applies to every laboratory where there are a lot of moving parts, a lot of variability. It's not like you put in sample inside a machine, you get the data out of it. The third important aspect is the field is moving fast. Technology is moving fast. You have seen last 7 to 8 years, many of the whatever you call aggregators or digital companies, it's in good way. Diagnostics is reaching to large number of population across the world. So we have to keep in pace with the automation. I think Dr. NEERAJ has emphasized this. Automations are extremely important, not just in terms of moving the speed or moving the pace at which you do the testing or volumes, but reduce the manual errors. Wherever possible, automation has to be there. It will significantly reduce the manual error. So these three are important aspects. Genetic testing is a different ball game. No space for errors, you can easily identify. The second aspect is the quality program, internal and external quality programs that individual laboratory does, including the pre-analytical aspects, are very, very important. It will give you a sort of introspect as to how you are doing, where you are going wrong. We have seen rarely situations where we found that suddenly an algorithm is throwing an error only when we ran a proficiency testing sample. And the third aspect is automations are extreme. These are the three pillars of any laboratory to reduce the errors in the laboratory with the proficiency team.
Thanks, Dr. Ramprasad. That's a really good summary. I'm looking at the time, and we're at the fag end of our session, the last 10 minutes, and so one thing that I think we will all agree is that over the last 2 or maybe even a few years leading up to before the pandemic, our diagnostics industry has seen a lot of flux, right? And some of those trends you mentioned, I think Rishi spoke about, how sort of the testing and is going closer to the patient at home, possibly. Right. From Agappe Diagnostics, we heard that there is a need to sort of bring supply chains closer. also sort of ensure that there is more automation. We're hearing, also from Dr. Reddi in a hospital setting, all the new innovations that are happening, right? Whether it's in interventional radiology or others. And so I think maybe to, kind of as closing remarks for this session, right? The other thing maybe we didn't talk about as much is if you talk about the business or finance point of view, we've seen some consolidation in the diagnostics industry. We've seen some acquisitions. We've seen some new entrants. We've seen some consolidations as well. So there is a lot of money and capital that's going in diagnostics as well, both on the industry side, both on the laboratory side. As hospitals, we've seen some consolidation there. We've heard of Manipal, acquiring a few hospitals of late. So I think there is a lot of flux in this industry, right? And since all of you bring a different perspective, maybe this is a good way to close out this session, right? So I'll go to Dr. Kumar at Agappe Diagnostics. We'll start with our industry, which is represented by Rishi and Dr. Then we'll go to Dr. Reddi for a hospital sort of perspective, and then maybe close it out with Dr. Ramprasad and Dr. ARORA from a lab perspective. So over to you, Dr. Kumar. Just kind of summing up, how do you see all these sort of, for lack of a better word, just the flux in this industry over the last 3-4 years?
The industry in diagnostics, that lab chains and all, it's all located in the urban-based. We are finding a lot of chains and labs, big labs in the urban-based area. But unless they can come to the rural area, there's a difficulty. All these disruptions are coming in the rural areas more. So in rural areas, they have to come to the patient side or to their side and get the service. But what happens in generally is that we have a lot of service providers happening in rural areas where maybe new generation people coming, they have with some applications. They come to your house, they take samples, they go to a laboratory, get samples. So what I feel is that these first class or class A laboratory chains should come to the rural areas and see the patient's comfort and come to that level, so that they can improve their share also in a very big way. That's what I feel.
Thanks. I think you make a good point. A lot of innovation we see is in the top 20 cities, and there's a whole 70% of the real India where there's still a lot of work to be done. Maybe this is a good way to bring in Rishi. Rishi, I'd love to hear your thoughts on sort of the disruption you and your company is bringing to the market, right? As also some recent acquisitions of companies like 1mg, right, that are kind of disruptors in their own space. So just to hear your thoughts and how that what that means for our diagnostics industry.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think let's break it up into two parts. One is what happens inside the lab and what happens outside the lab, right? So diagnostic industry, and for it to reach every corner of India, as Dr. Satheesh was also talking about, it's basically a logistics play, right? And with the advent of digital technologies and e-commerce portals and so on, I think that kind of is getting a lot of fillip, both in terms of logistics, is also getting access to collection centers and labs everywhere. It's essentially all about funneling the samples to the right lab, wherever that might be, to be able to do it. So there's a lot of work and innovation that's going on, and which is why we see that the turnaround times for various tests that are announced by the labs are shrinking by the minute, and that's essentially everything that happens outside of the lab, more with respect to logistics and how do we make that more optimized and efficient. I think the one big innovation that is the need of the hour inside the lab. We've spoken about the usual automation and being able to handle more samples. But I think one aspect that we haven't touched upon is being able to multiplex tests, right? So instead of looking at a particular test for a particular pathogen, I think we need to start looking at more syndromic approach towards testing, wherein a certain collection of symptoms put together, let's say if they are common, there should be a test which should be able to tell the treating doctor what is the underlying cause. And that can be done only through multiplexing. Otherwise, for instance, if a patient reaches me and I'm a doctor and the patient has fever, I don't know whether I need to think of it as typhoid or cholera or malaria or any of the other diseases, right? So if there is a what we call a fever panel, a multiplex test, which can tell the doctor, oh, hey, this is what the underlying cause for the fever is, and therefore this is what I need to treat. Similarly, if there is, for instance, respiratory distress in a patient, there needs to be a respiratory panel, a multiplex test, wherein there are lots of things, whether it's coronavirus or TB, etc., all multiplexed together in one test, and the underlying cause is then known, and the doctor can start treating. Right now, what happens is that typically the doctor would prescribe one test, and if that comes negative, then another and another, and so on and so forth. That wastes a lot of time. And also, as India is moving towards evidence-based medicine, we see doctors prescribing tests. But if it takes a lot of time, then I think we are losing valuable time that could be used to treat the patient. So I think that is one innovation that is definitely needed, and something that my organization is also working very hard towards.
Thanks, Rishi. You really brought up some good points. I think a well-done fever panel is really something that's need of the hour for our country. I'll go to Dr. Reddy Prasad, right? Because he's in a hospital, right? So if all of us do our job well, the primary care, secondary care is taken care of, right? And then only the real patients who need it end up at a specialized care setting like Manipal. So I'd love to hear your thoughts, sir, on how as sort of the diagnostics industry can be improving your work in the hospital setting.
Yeah, I would like to make a few points. Thank you, Mr. Kaartik. So one is the diagnostic industry. Two, R&D, research and development going on in several industries that improve the quality of medical technology and medical devices that we use on a day-to-day basis, and so much innovation that is going on throughout the world, not only in the Western world, but also our Indian companies gearing up to produce high-quality stents, high-quality balloons, and the catheters, making advances and improvement in delivery of healthcare. Meaning, the analogy would be, in maybe 25 years ago, what was a huge, large computer then became desktops and then laptops, and now we are able to do everything on an iPhone. What was required to be done through a huge laparotomy, big incision, a lot more procedures now can be done through pinhole. That's one way of summarizing with that analogy, that a lot of the patients do not need major surgeries. Everything can be done either through laparoscopy or robotic surgery or our interventional radiological procedures, which is through a pinhole. One of my favorite examples is a very common benign tumor of the uterus where women have suffered from heavy bleeding and all that, or fibroids. And in the past, or even now, where people are not aware, they might go get a hysterectomy done and the whole uterus is removed. Their hospital stay is longer and their recovery period is longer. With advances in the technology and our interventional radiological procedures, we do fibroid embolization. The patient is discharged the next day. The recovery is much quicker. There is no blood loss, no scar, risk of infection is much lesser. This is one very useful point with regard to innovation. Second thing is we are training many more significantly, increasing the number of available interventional radiologists, similar to other specialties. Third point is with regard to advances in digitization. All the patients don't need to come to the hospital for follow-up or the real initial consultation. We can have a video consultation. With advent of work from home, people don't have to really visit us. A lot more can be provided just through the web platforms, online platforms. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy. And so to close out the session, I think it's fitting that we go to our labs. Dr. NEERAJ, closing remarks on all the disruption you're seeing, or something that you've heard in this panel discussion. We'd love to hear your thoughts as well.
I think the two key things that this pandemic and the things that has been changing is mainly in the genomic space. That is what I feel. the genomics has come a long way, and two key points within that is the acceptability of the genomic tests being used. I do find that there is a lot more acceptability now as opposed to maybe around a year back. And the other thing is the availability of the genomic testing. So the availability is improving day by day. And as we talk now, the genomic, I do feel there is a genomic revolution being happening in India as well. And we will start seeing the results maybe in a short while from now. So two key things for me is the acceptability of the clinicians in terms of the genomic test has improved vastly now, and the availability, it is happening now, and you will see the results in very, very short times now.
Thank you, Dr. NEERAJ. Dr. Ramprasad, we've talked about genomics a lot. Dr. NEERAJ mentioned that now, patients are increasingly more accepting of this. Traditionally, from what I understand, this is something that's been done in the West. So I'm really happy to know that there are companies in India that are doing this, right? So as a closing remark, do you see that same sort of acceptance from patients or clinicians on the demand for genomic testing?
Yeah, still it is. It's not a direct-to-consumer test. It's still direct to clinician and hospital, because there are a lot of understanding about when and how the test needs to be used. Second, the interpretation of the results are extremely important. I'm not sure whether if you have read the recent New York Times article mentioning about a common NIPT test, which is a genetic test, saying that a lot of errors happen, and there was a scathing remark across the industry, including American College of Medical Geneticists. So it's important to understand the application and the importance of genomic tests is significant. And the more and more physicians and clinicians get aware on how it needs to be used in a proper way, the impact is going to be very high. And in general, for the diagnostic industry, including genomics testing, the good thing is technology is growing fast. New things which make significant impact are happening. The bad is lack of regulations and lack of guidelines. I think earlier speaker, Dr. Satheesh, also mentioned that there has to be guidelines as to which test, when to use, and how it needs to be used, how commonly it needs to be done. Some of the critical tests regularly needs to be done. Some guidelines have to come from government and organizations, including various clinical bodies. The worst part of it is, or the ugly part of it is, lack of minimal standards that are not there still in the industry, which is sort of creating a lot of issues, including proliferating small labs which don't even do the tests. We call them as sync tests. So these three things, if you are taken in the right context, I think we are in a good shape all through the country. We can create an impact across the world in any of these diagnostic industries.
Thank you, Dr. Ramprasad. I think with that, we're almost at the end of our session. I hope the viewers of Voice of Healthcare find this as informative as it's been for me. I'm left feeling incredibly buoyant having spoken to all of you. So, and it's fitting because we're right when Omicron is rising. But I think we've all learned. We've been through this for the last 2 years. So thank you again for your time. I know it's in the middle of the workday, so thank you again. And yes, I'm sure Voice of Healthcare will post this for other viewers and the general healthcare audience to enjoy. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.